Welcome to part 2 of this video. I shall assume you either have already watched part 1 or already understand how roller coaster trains, booking systems and park operations work. It is 1:06 PM on Tuesday the 2nd of June 2015 and the Smiler is in operation with 4 trains. It has been in operation since the start of the day without major issue or any faults. It is a busier day than expected and the queue is full. Alton Towers Resort Control decided the 5th train should be added and 2 mechanical technicians are present checking that train 2 is ready to add to the system. The 16 riders involved in the accident board the Smiler for the first time. At 1:08 PM, the ride operator attempts to dispatch the train. However, the dispatch buttons are depressed too long and a fault begins to flash on the display. As per operating procedure, the ride operator calls the technical services department and the 2 mechanical technicians are sent to the control cabin. The mechanical technicians log the fault in the daily ride report sheet and the park operations breakdown checklist. This is a simple fault to clear, but they decide that it is an appropriate time to add the 5th train to the ride. I should point out here that the 5th train added is train number 2. Contrary to many videos here on YouTube, this is not one of the trains involved in the crash. However, what follows in the next 10 minutes of the timeline is the first and minor issue raised by the reports, as it is a contradiction to operating procedure. However, I shall continue with the timeline as specified in the factual report and seek to address this at the end of the timeline. The 16 riders who have just boarded have their restraints released and they exit the train to take the position at the front of the queue. The ride operator cycles the next 3 trains empty in order to download all riders, ready for the ride to be passed over to the technical team. All 4 trains are now empty and at ground level. One of the mechanical technicians takes control of the HMI and they switch the Smiler into mode 2. The fault is acknowledged and reset using the fault reset button. In order to free up the transfer track, the train in the station is dispatched into block 1 and the holding brake underneath the station. This is not detailed in full, it could have actually circulated until the end of the ride at this point. The 2 trains afterwards are progressed into the next available blocks to free up the transfer track. Either one or both of the mechanical technicians head out to the transfer track in order to bring out the 5th train. I will assume only one is required whilst the other remains at the HMI. In adding the 5th train, 7 fault codes are recorded. These are all accounted for by the process used to add and remove a train. The train at the end of block 1 is sent around the circuit so that all 5 trains are now at ground level. The Smiler is then cycled in maintenance mode at least 3 times in order to give train 2, the one that's now been added to the ride, a test. Winds are beginning to gust at speeds in excess of 38 miles per hour. In addition to the situation that the trains are currently cycling empty and are approximately 17% lighter than they are when loaded with guests, they are struggling to complete the ride circuit. One of the test trains, upon reaching the end of block 3, is lost by the PLC as it does not reach lift 2. It's not clear in the factual report which train this is, it could very well be train 2, the one just added to the ride circuit. Meanwhile, the next train behind in the cycle is held at the end of block 1 in the lower floor of the station building complex. For some reason, the lost train did not have enough momentum to bridge the gap between the block 3 brakes and the lift 2 chain. At this point, I shall identify this is the location of control panel OPB3, which will be important later. This lost train has no methods of propulsion. It's going to need a push. The mechanical technicians leave the control cabin and are joined on the Smiler's off platform by 2 electrical technicians, electrical technician A and electrical technician B. This leads on to the second issue in the factual report, as now in attendance at the Smiler are 5 Alton Towers Resort team members, each qualified to operate the ride in some form. The ride operator, 2 mechanical technicians and 2 electrical technicians. This leads on to the first error. There is a miscommunication between the 4 technicians regarding how many trains are on track. The documents here are redacted and it is not easy to decipher the messages given. Not to help that post-accident, it is likely that the individuals involved here could be looking to implicate the other party, or there could be personal implications. We're not going to look at who is at fault at this stage, that will be for part 3. Electrical Technician B goes to the control cabin and takes control of the HMI. Meanwhile, Electrical Technician A assists the mechanical technicians in pushing the lost train at the end of Block 3, at the bottom of lift 2. To do this, they walk back through the queue line to an access gate and stairwell at the bottom of brake run 3, which links directly to the bottom of lift 2. They push the lost train until it re-engages with the lift mechanism, and then return to the ride's control cabin. Electrical Technician B at the HMI clears the fault and brings the lost train back to the station. This leads on to issue 3. From here on, the mechanical technicians are no longer identified as being in attendance and do not feature in the factual report timeline. They can rightly assume that the Smiler is almost ready to reopen, but having taken the ride out of service initially at 1:19 PM, they do not see this task through, which leads straight on to issue 4. To ensure the Smiler is now operating normally, Electrical Technician B at the HMI sends the next train, which is train 3, onto the circuit. But further gale force winds provide a greater resistance to its motion and it stalls at the top of the second inversion in the Staffordshire knot. This is not noticed by any of the team members at the Smiler, as Electrical Technician B signs the ride back over to the ride operator. According to the factory report, it is not possible to switch straight from mode 2 to mode 3. The ride first has to be switched into mode 4, evac. Due to discrepancies in other witness statements, I believe that this can be treated as a formality, even though the ride should be reset with all trains at ground level first. The ride operator allows the 16 guests, who had disembarked over half an hour earlier, back onto the train. They board train 4. After 20 seconds at the top of the inversion, the stalled train 3 finally falls backwards and valleys in the middle of the Staffordshire knot. The HMI does not display any errors or faults, as this section of the ride does not have any sensors and so the PLC only records that train 3 is located somewhere within block 3. This location has no means of propulsion and it is in the middle of an element. The only way to retrieve train 3 is to crane it off. In the Smiler's first year of opening, 2013, the ride stalled 4 times in the exact same location. Each time this required the train to be craned off and the ride was closed for at least 24 hours to permit this. The ride operators are not responsible for the progression of the trains about the circuit. Instead, their usual focus is on the station area whilst the ride's PLC does the rest. In addition, only 1 out of 25 CCTV cameras is focused on the location where train 3 has stopped, and so oblivious to the valid train, the ride operator dispatches train 4 with riders. However, since train 3 has not cleared block 3, the PLC still logs this block as occupied, and train 4 is stopped at the top of lift 1. A block stop outside of ground level requires intervention from the technical team, and the electrical technicians are there to assist. The HMI's central display of the track layout has the sections where it believes trains are located identified in blue, 3 at ground level, 1 on lift 1 and 1 on block 3. Following on from error 1, the miscommunication of number of trains on the ride, we arrive at error 2. The electrical technicians assume there are only 4 trains on the ride circuit and do nothing to confirm this, even though the ride log states the addition of the 5th train. However, there is no formal written procedure that requires the technicians to check this log in the event of a fault. From their position in the control cabin, they can clearly see 3 trains at ground level and know to look for train 4 at the top of lift 1, the subject of the block stop fault. Train 3 is only partially visible in the CCTV for the Staffordshire knot, but satisfied they already know where the 4 trains are located, they are not even looking for it. Furthermore, when the electrical technicians initially arrived at the Smiler, only 4 trains were clearly visible, 3 at ground level, a 4th stalled before lift 2, which technician A helps to push, the 5th was out of sight at the end of block 1. This brings us swiftly to error 3. Block 3 is showing as occupied. This also happens to be the block where technician A has just been to manually push the train onto lift 2. Convinced that there are only 4 trains on the system, which are all accounted for, electrical technician A is also immediately convinced that the fault is an error and is just a carryover of the previous fault. In terms of a visual inspection, he is only concerned with the status of the end of Block 3, and the opportunity to use the CCTV to check all of Block 3, the occupied section, is lost. Unfortunately, the full nature of this misconception cannot be discerned, as again this element of the report is heavily redacted. But as a result, electrical technician A is already satisfied that it is safe to do a block reset. In order to clear the occupied block, the electrical technicians retake control of the smiler and the ride is switched into mode 2. The block stop fault is reset, but block 3 still displays as occupied. In order to do a block occupied reset, the PLC requires the technicians to simultaneously press buttons on the HMI and at a satellite control panel, OPB3, beside the end of block 3. Electrical technician A heads back through the queue line to the access gate and stairwell to the end of block 3, where he has been less than 10 minutes previously. This leads to the final error. The ride's designer and manufacturers, Gertschlauer, had the intention that any person pressing the block reset button should first establish beyond doubt that the track section is free of a train, hence the location of this control panel beside the ride circuit to prompt a visual inspection. However, electrical technician A is already satisfied with the position of the 4 trains he believes are on the ride, so does not carry out any check. Technician A's priority has become getting the ride quickly back into service, a mistaken priority. Again, the exact nature of this part of the incident is not entirely clear due to significant redactions in the report. The electrical technicians press the buttons required to do the block reset, and the electrical technician A returns to the control cabin. For train 4 to proceed from lift 1, mode 4 must be used. Given that this train was stopped by a fault, mode 3 will not automatically cycle this train through the ride, and the smiler needs to be reset with all trains at ground level. In accordance with correct procedure, the ride operator asks central control to allow a code 0 and bring the trains back to the station. Permission is granted, and the ride operator also confirms with the electrical technicians that it is okay to proceed. The ride operator dispatches train 4 from the lift. Train 4 collides into the back of train 3 at approximately 44 miles per hour with 1.2 million joules of energy. This is equivalent to a family car travelling at 90 miles per hour. Train 3 empty weighs approximately 5,000 kilograms, and train 4 fully loaded weighs approximately 6,000 kilograms. The energy absorbed in the collision was approximately 380,000 joules, primarily impacting the floor and barriers of train 4, causing them to buckle up and towards the riders in the front row. On hearing the collision, the 2 electrical technicians leave the control cabin to investigate. 4 minutes later, further staff arrive at the smiler's control cabin. 2 minutes after this, a scaffold tower began to be erected at the point of collision to evacuate the riders. It was another 10 minutes after this, 17 minutes after the collision, that the 999 emergency call was made. This is likely the time taken for the park's own emergency medical responders to arrive and assess the injuries to the riders on the train. That concludes the timeline as specified in the Health and Safety Executive's Factual Report on the accident. Throughout the timeline there were a number of issues. Some of these presented contradictions to other documents, whilst others instantly raised questions as to why they happened. In this section I shall attempt to address and explain these issues to the best of my understanding. There will be some assumptions here and maybe minor inaccuracies, but the real answers will only be known by those individuals involved in the accident. Issue 1. At 1:08 PM the ride operator attempted to dispatch a train, but a fault condition occurred. 2 mechanical technicians already at the ride went to assist. The fault was logged, but then the ride operator continued to cycle the train to download the riders, before the fault was then acknowledged. However, a witness statement by an electrical technician for the smiler states that even in minor fault conditions the operator cannot dispatch a train. This contradiction can be resolved if we consider the following actually takes place. Upon seeing that it is a simple fault and does not require a login, the mechanical technicians clear it there and then at 1:10 PM. One of the technicians takes control of the HMI, they turn the ride into mode 2 and clear the fault. They then return the ride to the operator via mode 4. The ride operator then lets the current riders off their train, and they cycle the ride to download all riders from the Smiler, ready for the 5th train to be added by the technical team. This method of practice is demonstrated in the witness statement. In terms of process, this should not happen as the technical team have control of the Smiler whilst riders are aboard. However, this is a simple fault that the ride operator could clear themselves, as it does not require a login. However, they are only permitted to use modes 3 and 4. To clear such a simple fault, the trains would have to be evacuated where they were. This is a lengthy process, and if 5 trains are running, this could take upwards of 30 minutes. Hence, to keep the ride operating and to minimise downtime, it makes sense to carry out this process. But given that this is not strictly following policy, it highlights that technicians are willing to bypass procedure, so there should be a risk assessment of such practice and how it affects each ride at the park. Issue 2. Between 1:08 PM and 1:33 PM, the fault and subsequent addition of another train have been procedural. When the train fails to engage lift 2, 2 electrical technicians arrive to assist. Now, bearing in mind the Smiler has been closed for 20 minutes, initially because of a fault, there is no formal process to discuss the ride's present situation, leading to the communication error over how many trains are on the system. This could be seen as akin to a surgeon carrying out heart surgery on a patient, being joined by a second surgeon to assist him, but with whom he does not discuss in detail the patient's present condition. No single member of this team was required to, nor took, overall control of the process of bringing the Smiler safely back to service. Each had varying degrees of input in the process, and none had a full picture or understanding of the condition of the ride. There was no formal control over who was entitled to clear particular faults or the checks which should be done before clearing them. Issue 3. After bringing the lost train back to ground level, the one that had just been pushed to re-engage the lift mechanism, the 2 mechanical technicians are no longer identified as being in attendance and do not feature in the factual report timeline. Up until now, they are the only members of the technical team with a full and complete understanding of the Smiler's present condition. They leave before the ride is deemed ready to return to normal operation, as the last train sent did not successfully complete the ride circuit. Possible reasons for the mechanical technicians' departure are that they were called to assist another ride at the park. The electrical technicians may have offered to complete reopening of the ride and relieve the mechanical technicians who had been at the Smiler for over half an hour. In addition, there could be a workload clock. If the mechanical technicians have been working for over 2 hours without a break, they may have been required to hand over to the electrical technicians to avoid errors made through fatigue. In theory, the Smiler just needs one more train to be sent around successfully, then the ride can be returned to the operator. An easy task for the electrical technicians to complete. However, this leads to the biggie, issue 4. To ensure the Smiler is now operating normally, Electrical Technician B at the HMI sends the next train, train number 3, onto the circuit. Given that the previous train required physical intervention for it to complete the circuit, it had to be pushed onto lift 2, nobody watches this next train and sees that it fails to traverse the Staffordshire knot. In fact, the ride is returned to the operator before train 3 has even reached the top of lift 1. Furthermore, Electrical Technician A believes that the resulting block fault is a carryover of the lost train error. This suggests that he doesn't even know that the test train, train number 3, has been sent. Otherwise, I'm not sure how he can believe that the fault has arisen after the test train successfully negotiated the same block. Returning to the dispatch of the test train, train number 3, it's easy to understand why Technician B at the HMI only believed there were 4 trains on the system. The 4 at ground level are all in a line, and as such on the HMI display they appear as a single line. It is not easy to distinguish individual blocks, and from the control cabin only the 2 actually within the station are fully visible. That concludes part 2 of this video. Thank you for watching, and be sure to check out part 3, the aftermath and the Health and Safety Executive Report and conclusions.